The moment Rosora's boots touched the dry earth outside the stone house, her heart lurched with a feeling she hadn't expected dread. The wind swirled dust around her ankles, a sharp whisper of warning from the sertao. She gripped the handle of her leather suitcase tighter. Her eyes fixed on the front door of the house she had left 4 months ago, the house she had shared with Baltazar for a decade, the house where she had mourned him alone. That door creaked open before she could take a step. A man she had never seen before stood in the doorway, holding a baby swaddled in a worn cotton cloth. His shirt was stained with sweat and dust. His boots were cracked. Behind him, peeking from behind his legs and around the sides of the doorframe, were children, 8 of them, all barefoot, all silent, all watching her. She froze. Her throat-dried mouth parted in disbelief. Then with a slow, rising fury, she dropped her suitcase to the ground and took one step forward. "Who are you?" she barked. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" The man didn't flinch. Instead, he shifted the baby in his arms and removed his straw hat with his free hand. His voice, though quiet, carried across the open yard with unshakable calm. "My name is Jeremias. I'm Baltazar's half-brother. By law, half of this ranch is mine." The words fell like a whip crack. For a moment, Rosora didn't understand them, or refused to. The sun was hot on her back, the dust dry in her nostrils, and the faces of the children blurred as her breath shortened. What she said, choking on the word. The man nodded once, solemn. "We share a mother. I was born before her marriage to your husband's father, given away. But the law says I'm blood, and blood don't lie." Rosora's chest burned. That's not true. Baltazar was an only child. Everyone knew that. The baby in Jeremias's arms whimpered softly. Behind him, one of the older girls, perhaps 12, placed a protective arm around a younger boy. The youngest, a little girl no older than 5, clutched a headless rag doll to her chest. "I have documents," Jeremias said, his voice steady, but not unkind. "I'm not here to steal. I came because I have no place else. My wife died in childbirth 6 months ago. I've been trying to keep us fed. This land. It was the only hope left." Her vision blurred not from sun or tears, but from rage, from shock, from something she couldn't name that surged up through her like water rising too fast in a dry well. "Get out," she whispered. "We can wait for the lawyer if that makes it easier," he replied, as if she hadn't spoken. "He'll be here in the morning." "Said you'd want to talk." Rosora took another step forward. "You think I'm going to let you and your orphanage settle into my home, my kitchen, my land?" Her voice cracked, rising wild with disbelief. "This was mine and Baltazar's. You don't belong here." Jeremias's jaw tightened. "I don't want to fight, Senora, but I do have a right." She stared at him, shaking her head, backing away. The house behind him looked different now, occupied, changed, touched by other hands. A child's worn shirt hung from a nail by the window. A wooden toy horse lay tipped near the doorway. Her home, not empty, not silent, but no longer hers. Her suitcase lay forgotten in the dust. She turned and stormed past them through the doorway, not looking at the wide eyes of the children as she passed. Inside the house was clean, too clean. The floor had been swept. The air smelled of beans and freshly cut soap root. Dishes she did not own sat neatly stacked near the basin. The coals in the stove were still warm. Her chest tightened. She rushed up the stairs to the master bedroom. The door creaked as she opened it. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. Her shawl still hung from the back of the chair. The sheets were tight, the armoire closed, untouched. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her fingers into her temples, fighting the spinning in her head. Half-brother, a man no one had ever mentioned. Not even Baltazar, who could never shut up about the glories of his family. Proud man. Fierce man. A liar now, apparently. From downstairs, a faint thump of footsteps, the low murmur of children, a baby's cry. Rosora curled her fingers into the mattress. She had buried a husband, spent years praying to the Virgin for children that never came. She had swallowed shame worn mourning black and accepted solitude like it was her punishment for being barren. And now a stranger had arrived with more children than she could bear to count, holding a piece of paper and claiming half of her life no. She stood, grabbed the doorframe, and whispered to the empty hallway, "He's lying." She didn't sleep that night. Lying in her bed, her eyes wide open, she listened to the muffled voices downstairs. A child giggling, a boy shushed by an older girl. Then quiet again. The baby cried twice, soft, brief cries, and each time she heard Jeremias's voice. "Ta tudo bem pequena, papai tá aqui." That voice cut deeper than she expected. She turned toward the window, staring out at the black night beyond. Her throat ached. Her mind reeled. At dawn, she was already dressed when she heard hooves outside. Dr. Honorio arrived in a dust-covered coat, his gray mustache already damp from the humidity. He climbed down slowly and met her at the gate. She didn't greet him, just said, "Tell me you didn't know." His face gave her the answer before his words did. "I hoped you'd never need to know. But it's real, Rosora. I checked every record. He's who he says he is. Baltazar's mother had a child before she married. It was all hidden. I found the adoption registry, the handwriting, a letter, everything." She stepped back, her stomach turning. "And you just let him move in. He had nowhere else. The man buried his wife with his own hands. Rosora. The children were starving. He has no right to this place. He has the law." She clenched her jaw. Dr. Honorio looked down. "He'll wait for you to decide. But legally, you'll have to either split the land or buy him out. I can help arrange either." She stared past the lawyer toward the house. She could see the back of Jeremias's head through the open window leaning over the stove. 8 children. A dead wife. A stranger in her home. A past she never asked for. She turned to Dr. Honorio, her voice ice. "Get me someone who's willing to fight. Sangue e sangue, Dona Rosaura. E na lei do sertão, sangue fala mais alto que o luto." Dr. Evaristo spoke with the same chill that lived in the stone walls of his office. Rosora sat across from him, stiff-backed, her gloved hands folded tightly in her lap. Outside, the midday sun burned the red clay streets of Carnaúba das Almas, but in this room it felt like winter. "I don't care what the law says," she answered, voice flat. "I didn't suffer 10 years of silence, shame, and solitude just to hand over half my life to some man I never heard of. Blood may speak, but mine's boiling." Evaristo tilted his head, gray eyes studying her, as if she were a stubborn mule. "You want me to contest it? I want you to destroy it," she snapped. The corner of his lip lifted slightly. Not quite a smile, more like recognition. This was the kind of client he understood. Not soft-hearted. Not swayed by children with dirt-smudged cheeks or tales of tragedy. Rosora had walked into his office not as a widow, but as a storm. "Then we'll start with the documents. I'll request a full verification of the adoption records. A court-ordered analysis. If we can cast even a shadow of doubt, I want the whole thing thrown out." He raised one brow. "You're not asking for a delay, Senora. You're asking for war." She leaned forward. then arm yourself. Back on the ranch, the dust seemed to cling to the air thicker than before. Rosora rode alone that afternoon, the sun at her back as her horse trotted through the edge of the lower pasture. The cattle barely lifted their heads. She avoided the house, didn't want to see Jeremias mending the fence posts like he belonged there. Didn't want to hear the laughter of children echoing from the back of the house she once ruled in silence. As she rode, her mind wandered to what Dr. Honorio had said the day before. The adoption record, a scribbled note in a family Bible, the matching birth certificate, evidence. All of it pointing to a truth she never wanted. Baltazar had a brother, and the man now living in her kitchen had every legal right to be there. But what was legal wasn't always right. She returned near sunset, boots caked in dust. A curtain twitched in the living room as she approached. She knew they were watching. Good. Let them see her as she was. Not some grieving widow, but the senora of this land. Inside, the house smelled of food again. Cooked beans, fresh farina. The scent curled around her like a stranger's embrace, familiar and foreign all at once. She stepped into the hallway. A voice floated from the kitchen. "João, don't put the pot so close to the edge. Marta'll reach it." It was Jeremias speaking gently, patiently. Then a child's small voice. "Sorry, papai." Rosora clenched her jaw and walked past the doorway, not looking in. She ascended the stairs and closed her bedroom door behind her. She would fight them with everything she had. The next morning, Rosora rode into town early and found Dr. Honorio waiting at the post office. His eyes showed the wear of age, and though his mustache still bristled with pride, his voice had softened. "You sent word to Evaristo," he said without greeting. "I did." He nodded slowly. "He's a butcher with paperwork." "Good. I need someone who doesn't flinch at blood." They walked side by side through the quiet street. Merchants were opening shop fronts, sweeping dust from doorways. Somewhere nearby, a boy whistled while tossing bread to chickens. Rosara, Dr. Honorio said carefully, "Jeremias didn't come to take advantage. I was the one who found the documents. I contacted him. He didn't know about Baltazar. Not until I told him." She stopped walking. "You what I was handling the estate. I found the old records buried in a chest of Baltazar's things, and when I saw the name, I traced it. You're the reason he's here, I'm the reason the truth is here." She stared at him, lips pressed thin. "You should have burned them. I'm a lawyer, not a liar. You knew what this would do to me. I knew what it would do to justice." Rosora turned from him and walked off without another word. By mid-afternoon, the town was abuzz. Word traveled fast in Carnaúba das Almas. The widow of Rancho das Lajes had declared legal war against the man claiming blood. Some pitied her. Some pitied him. Most watched like it was theater. That evening, Rosaura sat on the veranda, her fingers curled around a tin mug of cooled coffee. The house was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that only came when children were trying hard to disappear. A soft knock at the front door broke it. It was Padre Elias Robes, dusty from travel, his white beard gleaming under the moonlight. He removed his straw hat and held it to his chest. "I heard you were back," he said. "Came to bless the house, I came to see the heart beating inside it." She didn't answer. He sat across from her without asking. For a while they said nothing. The crickets filled the air with their soft, endless music. "You know," he said at last, "when Baltazar died, I prayed for you. Prayed for peace to find you. Peace doesn't knock on your door holding 8 children. "No," he agreed. "But sometimes the answer to a prayer arrives dressed like a problem." She looked away. "I read the records. The man's story checks out. So I've been told. Over and over. You're not wrong to be angry. I'm not angry, she said coldly. I'm enraged. Elias leaned forward. Be careful, Rosora. Vultures follow rage. She closed her eyes for a long moment. He has no right to what Baltazar built. He has a right to half. By law. And law is all we've got left when pride starts pulling us under. Her grip on the mug tightened. Baltazar never mentioned him, she muttered. Perhaps he didn't know. Or perhaps he knew and chose silence, like he chose silence about other things. Elias tilted his head. You found something else, her lips pressed tight. Nothing that changes anything. He didn't press further, only stood replacing his hat on his head. I'll be at the chapel if you need more than lawyers. He paused at the door. You're fighting for something, Rosora. Just make sure it's worth the bruises. When he left, she sat for a long time in the dark. A voice echoed from the children's room upstairs. A boy whispering a prayer. One of the girls, maybe Lucia, shushing him gently. The baby fussed, then quieted. The house breathed, and Rosora knew she couldn't sleep again. She lit the lamp and opened her drawer. Inside, beneath old letters and dried lavender, lay her rosary and a folded paper, Baltazar's hospital record, the one she had uncovered days ago. The one that told her in black ink that the man she married had lied for years. She unfolded it again and stared at the words she could no longer ignore. She whispered into the dark, he made me carry that shame. All those years. In the silence that followed, only the baby's soft sighs answered. She folded the paper again. The court could drag on. The lawyers could bleed each other dry. But somewhere in that house were 8 children who weren't to blame, and one man who still hadn't asked for anything more than shelter. But the fight wasn't over. Not yet. 10 anos me culpando, e ele sabia o tempo todo que não podia me dar filho nenhum. Rosara said it aloud to the empty bedroom, her voice hollow like it had dropped into a canyon with no bottom. The folded document trembled slightly in her hands, though the air was still. The candle on her bedside table burned low, throwing unsteady light across the worn paper. Her eyes ran over the words again, even though she had memorized them. Patient Baltazar de Lages. Diagnosis azoospermia. Infertility due to congenital factors. Patient informed. 8 years ago. 8 years. She had prayed, begged, choked down bitter teas brewed by healers from every village within 3 days' ride. She had fasted, offered saints her silence, her hair, her future. All that time. He knew. She folded the page once, twice, and set it down with a trembling hand. Her legs gave under her, and she sat on the edge of the bed. For a while she just breathed, counted heartbeats, swallowed salt she didn't want to taste. He let her believe it was her fault, that her body was the one too cold, too barren, too cursed. When the aunts whispered behind their hands, when neighbors offered kind advice, when the priest told her gently to have faith, when her own mother cried and blamed her own bloodline. Baltazar had sat beside her through it all, silent as a stone, and held her hand like he shared the weight. But he wasn't holding anything. He was watching her carry it. The wind outside rose suddenly, slapping against the shutters. Somewhere in the kitchen below, a pan clattered to the floor, and the sound snapped her back into her skin. She stood. She didn't care what time it was. She needed to move. She grabbed the oil lantern and opened the bedroom door. The hallway was dark, but from the bottom of the stairs, she heard hushed voices. She descended quietly, barefoot. From the kitchen, flickering light spilled across the wooden floor. She could hear Jeremiah's voice, low, almost singing. A child giggled. Another hushed them quickly. Rosora paused just outside the door, her heart pounding. And then the goat jumped right into the basin, Jeremiah said, his tone warm with laughter. Spilled all the milk. It did not, one of the boys exclaimed. It did. Ask your tia Lucia. I'm not anyone's tia, the girl said shyly. You are to Marta, he replied. She watches everything you do. Rosora couldn't breathe for a moment. She turned and walked away from the door without a sound. The lantern in her hand swung gently at her side. Her feet moved toward the back porch without permission, like they remembered a place her heart hadn't caught up to yet. She stepped outside. The air was cooler now, kissed with the scent of cattle-dry wood, and the faintest promise of rain, a lie the sky often told. She sat on the porch step and looked out at the moonlit fields. The house behind her murmured with life that didn't belong to her, and yet somehow didn't feel entirely foreign anymore. She didn't know how long she sat there before she heard the door creak open behind her. Jeremiah's footsteps were soft. He stood behind her holding his own lantern, his hat off. Didn't mean to wake you. I wasn't asleep. He nodded, watching her in silence for a moment. You ride out today? She nodded. You thinking of selling it all, starting fresh somewhere, no? He waited. She turned toward him, her voice tight. Balthazar knew he couldn't give me children. Jeremiah's brow creased. You're sure I found the papers? He was tested 8 years ago. He kept it to himself. Let me believe I was the broken one. Jeremias lowered himself to sit beside her on the step, slow and careful, like the earth might shift. I'm sorry, he said softly. I'm not, she replied. Not anymore. The quiet stretched between them. Crickets filled it, then the wind. The sky had clouded, hiding the moon. Rosora wrapped her arms around herself. I think she said what hurts most is how easy it was for him. To let me wear that shame like a second skin. Jeremias nodded once. Sometimes silence can be a cruelty all its own. She looked at him, really looked for the first time. He wasn't handsome. Not the way Balthazar had been with his polished boots and proud shoulders. Jeremias's hands were rougher. His face sun-creased and honest. Tired in the way only widowers and ranchers and men raising 8 children alone could be. Why didn't you stay where you were, she asked. Before this. Before all this mess. We lived in a shed that didn't keep out the wind. The children were eating once a day. Maybe. I was doing honest work, but honest work doesn't always feed 8 mouths. He turned to her. Dr. Honorio found me. Told me about Balthazar. I didn't even know his name. Didn't know I had a brother. You never thought maybe it was better left buried, I did. But the chance for land, for safety for them, I couldn't walk away from that. She believed him. She hated that she believed him. Rosora stood. Her legs ached, but the numbness in her chest had lifted slightly. I'll be going back into town tomorrow, she said. To speak with the court, to look the judge in the eye, she answered. Let him know I won't give up what's mine without a fight. Jeremiah stood too. I don't want to take anything from you. Doesn't matter what you want. The law's already given it to you. He hesitated. Then maybe the law's wrong. She gave him one last look, then turned back into the house. The children were quiet now. The lamp in the hallway burned low. As she climbed the stairs, Rosora glanced at the small shoes lined neatly by the doorway, at the handmade dolls tucked beside the wall. Her chest tightened. She opened her bedroom door and closed it softly behind her. The paper still sat on the nightstand. She didn't touch it. She didn't need to. The truth it carried was already lodged too deep. But tomorrow she would carry it into the judge's chambers if she had to. Not for sympathy, not even for justice. Just to be seen. To say out loud what had been silent for too long. That she wasn't the broken one, and that someone owed her something for every year she had been made to believe otherwise. She called me auntie, and it was the first time I didn't want to correct her. The words echoed in Rosora's head long after they left her mouth, quiet and uncertain, like she wasn't sure if they were meant to be heard. But they had been. Padre Elias had nodded gently when she'd said them to him that morning in the chapel, like he understood the shift in her tone, the crack forming in the stone wall she'd built around herself. Now back at the ranch, that moment lived on in her chest, like a soft ember dangerous in the dry winds of the Sertão, but oddly warm. The sky had begun to gray by late afternoon. Dust curled around the stones near the back fence. She was inspecting the water troughs when a scream shattered the quiet. High, shrill, a child's. Rosora dropped the bucket and ran. She rounded the side of the house just in time to see one of the younger girls, Rosa, if she remembered right, curled on the ground near the jacaranda tree, her small hands clutched around her knee. Blood mixed with dust. The skin on her leg was torn open, a jagged cut across the shin. Two of her siblings stood frozen nearby, mouths open, eyes wide. Lucia knelt beside Rosa, trying not to panic. She tripped, Lucia cried. She was chasing a bird, and the root. She didn't see it. Rosora dropped to her knees beside them without thinking. "Move," she said quickly, voice firm but not cruel. The girls scattered back as she lifted Rosa into her lap, cradling the child against her chest. Rosa's cheeks were streaked with dirt and tears. "Let me see, Rosora," said, brushing the curls from her face. "It hurts," Rosa whimpered. "I know, querida. I know." Rosora pressed her lips together and breathed through the ache in her chest. "Come on. We'll fix it up." She carried the girl inside into the kitchen, where the lantern still burned from morning. She found clean watercloth, the old iron tin of balm she used for the horse's wounds. She cleaned the cut as gently as she could. Rosa sobbed at first, but clung to her little fingers wrapped around Rosora's sleeve like she'd done it 100 times before. "You're brave," Rosora whispered as she wrapped the leg. "Braver than most." Rosa sniffled. "Thank you, Tia." The word landed soft, heavy, holy. Rosora blinked. She didn't correct her, didn't flinch. Just tied the cloth and kissed the top of the child's head. Behind her, someone stepped quietly into the kitchen. Jeremias. His face was tight with concern, but when he saw Rosa safe in her arms, something shifted. He nodded, almost like bowing. She nodded back, equally uncertain, equally tired. "I'll carry her," he offered. "She's all right," Rosora said. "Just a scrape." Still, Rosa held tight to her as they moved to the sitting room. She settled the girl onto the cot in the corner, pulled a worn blanket over her small body. Lucia hovered in the doorway, unsure. "She'll be fine," Rosora told her. "Make her some tea later. Let her rest." Lucia nodded, but her eyes were on Rosora, not with fear, but something quieter. Gratitude, maybe. Recognition. That evening, Rosora sat on the front steps again. Her fingers were still stained with dried blood. The wind had cooled a little. The night would be chilly. She thought about the way Rosa had looked at her. Not with hesitation, not with confusion. With trust. That was the part she couldn't understand. She had come back to this house ready to fight, ready to defend every stone. And yet today, all she had done was hold a wounded child like she was her own, her stomach twisted with something she didn't want to name. Footsteps approached, careful on the wooden boards. Jeremiah sat beside her again, silent for a moment. "Thank you," he said. "I didn't do it for you, I know." They sat quietly for a while. She said, "Tia." He murmured, almost smiling. "She did. She meant it." "I know." The silence between them stretched soft and unfamiliar. "I thought I'd be better at this," he said suddenly, raising them alone. "But I'm not. I don't always know what to say. Lucia helps more than she should. She's a strong girl. She was 11 when her mother died. I think she stopped being a child that day." Rosora looked at the horizon. "I stopped too. Just not from death. From the absence of life." He didn't ask her to explain. She didn't offer. But he nodded like he knew. The moon rose behind the hills, casting silver across the dry land. Somewhere an owl called. The wind carried the scent of cooking smoke from the far edge of the village. "Did you know?" Rosora asked suddenly. He glanced at her. "About Baltazar? About the infertility? No." She nodded. "I believe you." Jeremias looked down at his hands. "Do you ever miss him?" "No," she said honestly. "I miss what I thought we'd have. But not him." The porch creaked under them as a breeze swept by. A moment later, one of the boys peeked out from the doorway. "Papai," he whispered, "Rosa's asleep. Lucia said to tell you." Jeremias nodded. "Thank you, Pedro. Back to bed now." The boy disappeared. "She has them in a rhythm," Rosara said. "Lucia, she's always been the steady one. The others lean on her. And you, I lean on all of them. More than I should." She stood. "They lean on you too. That much is clear." He rose with her. "You're not what I expected. Neither are you." They didn't smile, but something unspoken passed between them. Inside the house was quiet. The children slept. The air smelled of chamomile and ash. Rosora passed Rosa's cot on her way to the stairs and paused. The girl slept, curled on her side, one arm tucked beneath her cheek, the bandaged leg stretched out from under the blanket. Rosora touched her forehead gently, then climbed the stairs. In her room, she undressed slowly, each movement weighed with something she didn't have a name for. Her nightgown felt heavier than usual, her thoughts even more so. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Today had changed something. She didn't know what, or if she wanted it. But when she closed her eyes, it wasn't Baltazar's face she saw. It was Rosa's, smiling through tears and calling her Tia. "Keep it all. Just let me have a roof so my children don't sleep on dirt anymore." Jeremias's voice was steady, but it carried the tremble of someone who had run out of pride long ago. He stood in the small parlor where Dr. Honorio had once read Baltazar's will aloud, though no will had ever truly existed. Now that same room, once filled with Rosora's silence and dust, was full of other things: the smell of cooking, the whispers of children, the sounds of life trying to be careful. Rosora sat in the armchair across from him, stiff as carved wood. Her arms were crossed, her fingers tucked beneath her elbows so tightly she couldn't feel her own skin. "You're saying you'd walk away from half the ranch," she said flatly. "From everything the court already says is yours." "I don't want half a ranch. I don't want land or money or cattle," Jeremias said. "I want my children under a roof that doesn't leak when it rains." Rosora stared at him, and for the first time she didn't see a man standing in her way. She saw a man who had already walked too far on tired feet, holding a baby in one arm and the weight of 8 lives in the other. She looked past him toward the hallway, where faint giggles could be heard, quickly hushed. One of the boys had dropped a cup earlier. She hadn't yelled. She'd simply looked, and that had been enough. "You're not asking to buy it," she said. "I don't have anything to buy it with. And yet you'd give up what you do have." Jeremias nodded, in a heartbeat. Rosora shook her head and stood needing to move to breathe. She walked toward the window, looked out over the back field. The corral fence was nearly mended. Jeremias had done that. The vegetable patch near the old well had been weeded, Lucia probably. "Why the caretaker's house?" she asked without turning. "It's small, but we'd fit, just barely. And you'll work from sun up to after dark. No pay, just food and a place to sleep. That's enough." She turned slowly. "Are you begging, Jeremias?" "I did that already. In cities that shut doors before I could knock. I'm not begging now. I'm offering peace." The word hit her hard. Peace. It had been a foreign concept for so long she didn't know how to hold it in her mind. Not since Baltazar had died, maybe not even before. She watched him waiting for something false to slip from his mouth. But it didn't come. Jeremias didn't lower his gaze, didn't fidget or shift. He looked at her with a calm that came from suffering, not weakness, but endurance. And that was worse. She hated how it made her want to believe him. "Do the children know what you're giving up?" she asked. "They don't need to. Then they will never understand what this land cost you." Jeremias breathed in, then let it out slow. "They'll understand that they're safe. That's enough for me." Rosora walked away from the window, past him to the kitchen doorway, where a pot simmered quietly on the stove. She stirred it once slowly, though she had no idea what was inside. She just needed the motion, something for her hands. She had expected him to fight, to push, to plant his feet and shout like men often did when they thought they had a claim to something. Instead, he offered surrender, and that made her furious. She turned to face him again. "I don't need your peace," she snapped. "I need you gone." "I'll go if that's what you truly want," he said, no edge in his voice. "But you'll have to tell the children." Rosora flinched. He'd said it so simply, so plainly, but it landed like a stone in her gut. "You think I won't?" "No," he replied. "I think you could. I just think it would tear something in you that won't heal." She opened her mouth to lash back, but nothing came. Only silence. The baby cried in the next room, Marta still too small to know her world was full of uncertainty. Rosara heard Lucia hum softly, settling her again. She closed her eyes. A memory surged forward, sharp and sudden. Her own mother, long ago, brushing the hair from her face during a fever, whispering prayers over her in the same lullaby rhythm Lucia used now. A rhythm passed down like heirlooms, like land, like pain. She opened her eyes. Jeremias stood there, unmoving. "I'll speak to Dr. Honorio," she said finally, her voice low. "You'll have your corner of the land. But this isn't a gift. You'll work, and I'll expect results. I wouldn't ask otherwise." She stepped closer, stopping just in front of him. "If I ever catch you lying about your past, your rights, your children, if I ever see even a glimmer of falsehood, I won't just take the roof away. I'll bury you in this land." "Do you understand I do?" he said softly. "And I wouldn't blame you." She nodded once. Behind them, Rosa shuffled down the hallway, her legs still wrapped in clean white cloth. She smiled when she saw Rosora and ran to her barefoot and limping. "Auntie," she said breathlessly, "Lucia made bread. Do you want some?" Rosora caught herself before correcting her. Again. "Maybe later, querida." Rosa clutched her hand for a second, then skipped off her limp, barely noticeable. Jeremias looked down. "They've gotten used to you. More than I hoped." "I didn't do it for them," Rosora said, even though they both knew it wasn't true anymore. Later that night, when the house was quiet and the stars spilled across the Sertão sky like salt, Rosora sat on the back steps again. Her bones ached, her eyes were heavy, but her heart wasn't sharp with fury like before. It was just tired. She didn't hear Jeremias come up behind her this time. He didn't speak. Neither did she. They sat in silence, the kind that didn't need mending or explanation. When she stood to go back inside, she paused. "I'm not giving up my land," she said. "I wouldn't ask you to. I'm not giving up my name. You've already given more than you know." She didn't reply. Just looked at him once, then turned and left him with the night. In her bedroom, she undressed slowly, her hands moving without thought. On the edge of the bed sat the medical record, still folded, still accusing. She picked it up, considered burning it, but instead she slipped it into a box beneath her bed. Some truths didn't need to be carried forever. Some were heavy enough just once. "I don't want your half. I want us to take care of this place together." The words didn't come easily to Rosora's lips. They rested heavy on her tongue for days before she finally let them out. When she did, they landed not with fire but with something softer, like a door slowly creaking open after years rusted shut. She said them on a Thursday morning, just after sunrise, with mist still lifting off the fields and the scent of dew clinging to the air. Jeremias had just finished chopping wood behind the stable, sleeves rolled up, chest rising slow from labor. He turned at her voice, unsure he'd heard right. "You want what?" She stepped closer, chin lifted, heart loud in her chest. "We split the work, split the profit. Not the land, not the house. We run it together." His brow furrowed. "You want to be partners? I want this ranch to thrive. That won't happen with court papers and bitterness stretched over every acre. I see how you work, how the children help. You're not a burden, and I'm not broken. We both deserve a second chance." Jeremias stared at her a long time, the axe still in his hand, forgotten. "You're serious. I don't say things I don't mean." He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his arm. "And the caretaker's house, stay where you are. The big house has room." He looked away, then toward the house. Toward the windows where Lucia was probably drying dishes, and little Marta played with bits of cloth tied into knots. He looked back at Rosora, something uncertain flickering in his eyes. "I don't want to take up space that doesn't belong to me." "That space was empty for too long," she said. "Now it has life in it again. Don't insult it by calling it theft." He leaned on the axe handle, nodding slowly. "All right, if that's what you truly want." "It is," she said. And it was. That evening they sat down for dinner together, not at opposite ends of the table, but near the center. The children, wide-eyed, followed Rosora's lead, hesitant but curious. She passed bowls of beans and farina-filled plates, even reached across the table to pour water into Jeremias's cup. When Pedro asked if she would tell a story like his mother used to, she hesitated, then nodded. She told them one about her father, who once caught a jaguar sleeping under their ox cart and threw a stone just to watch it run. The boys leaned forward, Lucia laughed under her breath, and Rosora felt something click into place. After the meal, Rosa carried the empty cups to the basin without being asked. The partnership wasn't just in the fields, it had started in the house too. The days that followed were full. Rosaura oversaw the books, the sales ledgers, and contracts. Jeremias handled the land, the fences, the cattle drives. The children did what they could. Rosa and Sophia collected eggs the boys tended to the goats. Lucia took care of the garden, and little Marta, who had begun crawling faster than anyone expected. Rosaura sometimes caught herself smiling without realizing it. There was motion again, rhythm, and it didn't ache the way it used to. She began to learn the children's quirks. Miguel, the oldest boy, had his father's quiet strength. He barely spoke, but he watched everything. When one of the calves went missing, he was the one who tracked it down before sunrise, covered in burrs and proud as a rooster. Joao was clever with his hands, always fixing broken things with string and nails. He mended the leg of her old sewing chair without being asked. Anna, the one with the doll missing an eye, had a sharp memory. She remembered recipes after hearing them once, and when Rosaura showed her how to knead dough properly, she did it better the second time than Rosaura ever had. The house shifted around her. It breathed differently. No longer a monument to the past. Now it was a home. One morning, Rosaura stood at the edge of the pasture watching Jeremias ride back from checking the north herd. The sun was still low, the air damp. As he dismounted, he saw her waiting by the gate, arms crossed, but not in defense. "I was thinking," she said, "we could use another mule." He blinked. "Another, the transport's slow. If we had two going at once, we'd get feed and salt in half the time." "You're right." She handed him the ledger marked with neat columns and notes. "I found a supplier 2 towns over. Price is fair." He looked down at the page, then back up at her. "I never thought I'd be taking orders from a woman." She raised a brow. "I never thought I'd be giving them to a man who listens." He chuckled, scratching his beard. "Fair enough." Later that week, Padre Elias rode in dusty and sunburned and stood in the courtyard, blinking at the noise pouring from the house, children laughing, water splashing, someone pounding dough. "Well, look at that," he murmured. Rosaura came to the door, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Padre, I came to check on the souls here. Seems I found them at peace." "Temporarily. I'll take that. You two look like you've stopped circling each other like vultures. We've reached understanding." Padre Elias smiled. "Understanding is the first step to grace." Rosaura didn't answer. She only held the door for him to come inside. That night, as the sky burned orange and purple, and the wind kicked up dust along the fields, Rosaura sat on the porch steps, again, her hands folded in her lap. Jeremias joined her with a cup of strong coffee. They didn't speak right away. They didn't have to. After a while, Rosaura asked, "Do you miss her?" Jeremias was quiet for a moment. "Every day." "What was her name?" "Clarice." "She must have been strong." "She was. Fierce when she needed to be. Gentle with them. Smarter than me always." Rosaura nodded. "I would have liked her. She'd have liked you." Rosaura looked at him then. Not for a second, but long enough. "You still wearing your ring?" he asked. "No," she said. "Took it off the day I read the doctor's report." He nodded. She turned her gaze to the sky. "I lost more than a husband when Baltazar died. I lost the illusion, but I'm starting to think what I've found since is more real than anything we ever had." Jeremias took a slow sip of his coffee. "And do you regret not making him tell the truth?" "I regret not asking harder questions." They sat there, the last light draining from the day. The ranch was quiet now, but not empty. Tomorrow there'd be fences to fix, a mule to purchase, bread to bake, children to guide, and Rosora would not be alone in any of it. It rained, after years, and inside me it did too. It came in the early morning before the sun, before the roosters even found their voices. A low murmur in the sky, a breath in the wind. Then a soft patter on the roof, gentle as a memory, but impossible to ignore. Rosora sat up in bed before she was fully awake, her hand going instinctively to the window. Her breath fogged the glass as she peered out into the faint gray light. Rain. Real rain. Not a passing cloud or a liar's sprinkle. Steady, soft, and soaking. She threw on her shawl and stepped out onto the veranda. The air was different, wet and clean, like the land had exhaled all its sorrow in one slow breath. The ground drank greedily, darkening under each drop. The mango tree by the fence swayed in rhythm with the breeze, its leaves slick and shining. Jeremias was already in the yard, barefoot arms spread to the sky shirt clinging to his skin. The children trickled out behind him, some wrapped in blankets, others laughing as they danced through puddles forming in the dirt. Marta squealed with delight as Pedro twirled her in the rain. Lucia tilted her face upward, eyes closed, lips parted in wonder. Rosara didn't move at first, just watched. Something tight in her chest began to loosen. Not everything had to come with pain. Not every new thing had to threaten the old. She stepped off the porch, slowly barefoot, like the rest, and let the rain touch her face, cool and clean. She stood in the middle of the yard, hands at her sides, letting it soak through her nightdress. She felt the water run down her spine, felt the earth soften beneath her feet, and something inside her cracked, quietly, beautifully. Jeremias turned and saw her. She didn't say a word, and neither did he. They just stood in the rain, two souls rinsed clean. Later that day, the house buzzed with movement. Rain meant new chores, gutters to check leaks, to patch barrels, to fill. Jeremias hauled wood while Miguel and João worked side by side to fix the corner of the roof above the pantry. Inside, Rosara wrung out sheets and hung them by the hearth to dry. Lucia brought in herbs that would spoil if left outside. Anna stirred a pot of bean stew, humming the melody Rosara had taught her the week before. Rosara moved through the house like a conductor guiding a quiet orchestra. Every motion mattered. Every step carried purpose. The home pulsed with life. But more than that, Rosara felt wanted, needed, not tolerated, not respected out of obligation, loved. That night after supper, the children sprawled across the floor in front of the fireplace, playing with handmade toys. Marta had fallen asleep with her thumb in her mouth, curled up in Rosa's lap. The flicker of firelight painted the walls in amber and gold. Rosora sat on the settee, sewing a button back onto one of Jeremias's shirts. She didn't remember when she'd started doing that, mending his clothes. It had happened slowly, naturally, like weeds blooming into flowers. Jeremias entered the room with 2 mugs of tea and set one gently on the table beside her. "Didn't expect to see you out in the rain this morning," he said. She glanced up, a faint smile playing at her lips. "Didn't expect to enjoy it. It suited you. Getting soaked to the bone numb. Letting go." She didn't reply. Her fingers paused mid-stitch. He watched her a moment longer, then sat across from her in the old armchair that had once been Baltazar's. Rosora hadn't let anyone sit in it for almost a year, until now. The thunder rolled softly in the distance. Rosora looked toward the children. "They don't know how lucky they are, or how fragile peace can be," Jeremias added. "I used to think peace was silence, an empty room, a clean kitchen. No voices. She looked back at him. But it wasn't peace. It was loneliness dressed up as discipline. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. You found a new kind of quiet. She nodded. The kind that lets your heart rest without going numb. Outside, the rain softened to a drizzle just enough to drum against the tin roof like fingers on a drum. I've been thinking, Rosora said. Jeremias raised a brow. This land, it's more than property. It's a chance. For what? For all of us. To build something better than what came before. You and me, these children, we weren't given the lives we hoped for. But we've been handed something else. Something that might be worth more. Jeremias said nothing, but his eyes searched her face. She met his gaze. Don't waste it. I won't, he said softly. She believed him. The next few days passed in a blur of growth. Rain meant green. The garden flourished. The soil loosened for planting. Chickens laid more eggs. The goats stopped their restless bleating. Even the cattle seemed calmer, their bodies heavier with promise. Rosora rode out with Miguel and Jeremias to mark off new fencing near the southern boundary. Her boots squelched in the wet earth, her skirts splattered with mud. She didn't mind. She even laughed when a branch snagged her shawl and nearly dragged her backward. You're turning wild, Jeremias teased, adjusting the post he'd just hammered in. She gave him a look. Maybe I've always been wild, just better at hiding it. He grinned, that rare smile that made his eyes crinkle. That I believe. When they returned, Lucia had hung clean linens on the line, and the house smelled of sweet bread. Inside, Rosora paused in the hallway, watching as João helped Sofia tie a ribbon in her hair, both of them whispering secrets and giggling. She reached out and touched the wall beside her. The house had changed. Or maybe she had. That night, after Marta had been tucked in and the lamps were out, Rosora sat once again on the back steps, watching the stars blink back into the sky. Jeremias joined her this time with no coffee, no need to speak. They sat in the dark, shoulder to shoulder, letting the silence stretch. Rosora turned her face to the sky and whispered, I used to pray for rain, for years. And when it never came, I thought God had gone quiet. Jeremias glanced at her, but he wasn't quiet, she said. He was waiting for me to stop listening for what I wanted and start hearing what I needed. And what did you need? She looked at him full in the face. You. I said goodbye to a man who died twice, the first time when he stopped loving me, the second when I stopped waiting for him. The sun had just cleared the ridge when Rosora tied her hair back with the same black ribbon she'd worn to Baltazar's funeral. It felt strange now, too somber for the morning light. The house behind her was already stirring Marta's cry, from her cradle Lucia boiling water, the older boys whispering about fence repairs. She moved quietly, leaving through the side door before anyone could follow. The long road to town was still damp from the last rain, the mud along the edges firming under the rising heat. Her boots left a pattern in the dirt, the same way she had once left parts of herself behind, on roads just like this when she went to plead with doctors or beg saints or sell jewelry to pay for medicine. But not today. Today she was going to do something for herself. The folder rested inside her satchel, the brittle paper heavier than iron. Inside the clinic, record her own affidavit, the court request, all prepared, all signed. It had taken her weeks to decide what to do with them. Not to use them as a weapon, but as a truth laid bare. She passed the old eucalyptus trees near the river bend. They still leaned from the last hard storm like the wind had tried to pull them from the earth and gave up halfway. Their bark peeled like skin. She'd always hated those trees. The town came into view around mid-morning. Her hands ached from gripping the reins too tightly, but she didn't ease up. At the courthouse steps, she dismounted, handed the reins to the boy who sat there every day waiting for coins. "Won't be long," she said. He nodded. Inside it smelled like ink and dust. The clerk glanced up, recognized her, and sat straighter. "Rosora de Lages," she said. "Here to withdraw my claim." He blinked. "Withdraw." She set the folder down on his desk. All of it. The property contest. The appeal, everything. The man hesitated. "Do you want to file a new petition?" "No." She pushed the folder forward. "Just make sure this gets archived and closed. But it changes nothing I can't live with." He didn't understand, but he nodded. Back outside, the heat had crept in full. She let the boy keep the change from the ride and mounted again. This time she took the long road back through the lower pasture and around the old, abandoned sugar mill. At the base of the hill, near the chapel, she slowed. Baltazar's grave was just visible between the wild grasses, the headstone plain, and sun-faded. She dismounted, walked toward it with slow, deliberate steps. No flowers, no offerings, just silence. She stood there a long while, arms crossed, looking down at the man she'd once begged to love her better. The man she'd waited for, forgiven, covered for, protected. "You don't get to live in me anymore," she said softly. The wind caught her skirt, tugged it like a child pulling at a mother's hand. "I grieved you when I didn't even know what I'd lost. But now I do." She crouched, pulled a few weeds from the stone's edge. "I thought you were my whole world, but you were just the beginning of it." She stood again. "I'm not angry anymore. But I'm not yours anymore either." She touched the stone with her fingertips, brief as a breath. Then she turned and left him behind for the last time. When she arrived back at the ranch, the children were outside. Rosa ran up first, barefoot hair tangled. "Tia, Tia, we made mango bread." "You did?" Rosora smiled, stooping to hug her. "Is it any good? Lucia says it's the best yet, but she won't let us eat it till dinner." "Well," Rosora said, brushing the dust from Rosa's cheek, and then, "I suppose we'd better wait." Inside, Lucia stood by the stove, sleeves rolled up, apron streaked with flour. She looked older lately, not in years, but in steadiness, like the kind of woman who'd seen too much and survived all of it. "You went to town," she said without looking up. "I did. And it's done." Lucia nodded. "Good." Jeremias came in from the back doorway, shirt damp with sweat, and a shovel over his shoulder. "You all right?" he asked, eyes narrowing with quiet worry. She walked to him, took the shovel from his hands, and leaned it against the wall. "I told Baltazar goodbye," she said. Jeremias didn't ask for details. He just reached out gently, brushing her arm. "I'm here," he said. "I know." That night the kitchen filled with warm smells and quiet laughter. Rosora sat at the table watching Marta squish bits of mango bread between her fingers, while Anna tried to teach her to clap. Jeremias poured water into the children's cups, then sat beside her. When all the plates were cleared, Rosora stood. The room quieted slightly. "I want to say something," she began. The children looked up, alert but calm. "I know this house wasn't always full, and when it wasn't always happy, but now it's something else." She glanced around at the faces, curious, hopeful, not afraid. "It's home, if you want it to be." Lucia nodded, tears in her eyes. Miguel gave a quiet smile. Even João, who rarely spoke, let out a soft breath like he'd been holding it for months. Rosora looked at Jeremias. I don't know where this road leads, but I'm not walking it alone anymore. He reached for her hand under the table, and for the first time she didn't pull away. The children returned to their games. The fire crackled, and the night stretched wide and deep, not like a shadow, but like an embrace. The past didn't knock on the door. It broke it down. It happened in the dry heat of mid-morning, when the wind had gone still, and the birds stopped singing, as if the land itself sensed something wrong before anyone else did. Rosora was in the back room folding linens with Lucia when the shouting began. Male voices. Low, angry, unfamiliar. The words weren't clear at first, but the tone snapped her head up instantly. Then came the bang, a fist against wood. Then another. Then the front door was flung open without waiting for invitation. She stepped into the hallway, just as Jeremias reached the base of the stairs, flanked by Miguel and João, both boys stiff with tension. In the doorway stood three men, lean, sun-darkened, and grim. Their horses waited behind them, restless and dust-covered. One of the men held a yellowed paper in his hand. "Who's the widow?" he asked, though his eyes were already on her. "I am," Rosora said, lifting her chin. The man stepped forward and handed her the paper. She didn't look at it. Not yet. "And you are names Helio Machado. These are my brothers. We're kin to Baltazar. He was our cousin's boy." "I know who you are," Rosora said coolly. "You're the ones who never showed up when he was sick, or when the funeral needed paying for." Helio didn't flinch. "That might be. But we're here now, and the state's recognizing blood." She unfolded the document slowly. It was an official summons claims of delayed inheritance review tied to land ownership. The Machado cousins were petitioning for their rightful portion, stating Baltazar had no children, no surviving wife recognized by their family, and no legal will filed. Rosora scanned it carefully, though the weight of it was already sinking into her stomach. "Half the land," Helio said. "Split between us. We'll send a man to work it, and another to inspect the house." "You'll send no one," Jeremias growled, stepping forward. Helio didn't back down. "This is legal. We've got papers, witnesses, family ties." "So do I," Rosora said, voice hardening. "And I've already buried enough people on this land." "You want to be next," Helio smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The courts'll decide, Senora. We just thought it fair to let you know in person. We don't like sneaking. I don't like threats. No threats. Just business." The men turned their boots, dragging dirt through the hall, their silence more dangerous than noise. When they were gone, Rosara let the paper fall from her hand. Lucia picked it up slowly. "Do we need to leave?" she asked, voice tight with fear. "No," Rosara said, her tone cutting through the tension like a blade. "No one's leaving." Jeremias crossed the room and rested his hand on her back. "We'll fight it. We shouldn't have to, but we will." That night, Rosora sat at the kitchen table with Padre Elias, who had ridden out as soon as the news reached town. "They'll dig into everything," he warned. "Records, registries, church logs. The smallest inconsistency, they'll use it." Rosora sipped her coffee slowly, eyes steady. "Let them dig. There's nothing left to bury. You and Baltazar, your union wasn't recognized by his family." "No. They never accepted me, and now they think the land is unclaimed." She nodded. "Because it would be easier to believe that than to accept I earned it." Elias leaned forward. "Do you want me to speak on your behalf?" "Not yet. Let me try first. If I fall, then you speak." Outside, the children were quiet. Jeremias paced the porch, while João and Miguel checked the outer locks. The house felt different again, not like a home, not tonight. Like a fortress. One where peace had paused, but not broken. That week, Rosora and Jeremias began gathering everything. Birth certificates, marriage registrations, doctor's notes, witness letters from neighbors. Even the old dusty journal Baltazar used to write in when he was drunk. Rosora found it under the stairs, pages yellow and fragile, but legible. A line on one page read, "If I die before her, at least the land is in good hands. Better hands than mine." She tucked it into the folder with the rest. "Will it be enough?" Lucia asked as she helped organize papers. "No," Rosora said, "but it will be loud." On the third day, a stranger came up the drive, an older woman in worn clothes leaning on a cane. Rosora stepped out to meet her before she even knocked. "Ma'am," the woman said softly. "Name's Palmyra. I worked for your husband's father. Cooked and cleaned when Baltazar was still a boy." Rosora nodded. "I remember hearing about you." Palmyra glanced toward the pasture. "I heard what the Machados are doing. I don't want them winning. Your man, he wasn't always kind, but you made this place better. If you need a statement, I'll give it." Rosora opened the door wider. "Come in. We'll get you some tea." More people came. Quiet neighbors, old ranchers, women who had sold goods to the children at the market, men who remembered how Jeremias patched fences without charging coin. Bit by bit, a different kind of case began to form, one not built on bloodlines, but on roots. Still, Rosora slept lightly. Her dreams were restless. One night she woke with a start, convinced someone was on the land again. She crept to the window. Nothing. But the fear lingered, coiled in her ribs like a snake. In the morning, she stood beside Jeremias as he inspected the cattle pen. "Do you think they'll come back?" she asked. "Not soon," he said, "but eventually." She looked past the fence toward the dry road that led back to the town. "They won't take this from me," she whispered. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Later, as the children sat in the shade reading, Rosara leaned against the kitchen doorway, arms folded. She watched as Pedro braided Lucia's hair, as Ana showed Marta how to press flowers between pages of a book. The house was holding strong, but so was the wind outside. And Rosara knew the storm wasn't over. Not yet. "There's no blood between us, but there's love, and that's thicker than any inheritance." The sound of the judge's gavel echoed through the town courthouse, not with the finality Rosora had hoped for, but with the dull thud of delay. The proceedings had started that morning and stretched into the hottest part of the afternoon. The Machados had shown up in crisp shirts and tight mouths, backed by lawyers who waved documents and talked about rights and names like they were currency. Rosora had brought no lawyer. She stood with her folder of proof paper thin but full of weight, and with Jeremias at her side, silent and tall, his presence alone enough to make even the officials uneasy. The court agreed to extend deliberations. They wanted more witness accounts, more review, more time, more ways for someone else to take everything. When she stepped outside into the thick sunlight, Rosora didn't speak. Jeremias followed close, his hand brushing against hers as they walked past vendors and staring faces. The town felt smaller than it ever had before. At the hitching post, Rosora stopped. "You should take the papers home," she said. "You're not coming. I need to clear my head." Jeremias studied her, then nodded. "I'll ride ahead. The children will be waiting." She watched him mount his horse and ride off before she turned and walked down the path toward the edge of town, toward the little cemetery, where old names slept beneath cracked stones and weeping trees. She found her mother's grave first, then her father's. She crouched beside them, brushing leaves from the names carved there. They'd laugh, she said softly. They'd say, "You should have burned the papers and buried the rest." Maybe they were right. But even as she said it, she knew she couldn't have. The fight wasn't for her pride. It was for something that had grown in her chest since the moment Rosa called her Tia without being told. Since Lucia began humming lullabies in her kitchen. Since Marta fell asleep each night curled into her lap like she belonged nowhere else. She couldn't walk away from that. She wouldn't. When she returned to the ranch just before sundown, the sky was painted orange and indigo, and the children were gathered under the shade of the jacaranda tree playing with wooden toys João had carved. Jeremias was on the porch sharpening a blade, but when he saw her, he stood. "No news?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not yet." He set the blade down. "I've been thinking." Dangerous habit. He gave her a faint smile. "I want to make it official. With the children." She froze. "You mean, I want to be their father? Not just in name, in law?" Her breath caught. "You'd take that on?" she asked. "I already have. But I want them to know it's real. And I want them to know it came from you, too. That we're not halfway anything. We're whole." Rosaura turned to look at the children. Anna had Marta in her lap, showing her how to fold scraps of fabric into animals. Rosa sat beside her, humming. Miguel stood watch like always. "They need more than land," Rosaura murmured. "They need a family." She looked back at him, then, "We do it. Together." That night, Rosaura gathered the children around the table after dinner. The fire burned low, casting shadows on their eager faces. "There's something we want to ask you," she said, her voice steady. Jeremiah stepped forward. "I know I'm not your papa, and I can't replace what you lost. But if you'll have me, I'd like to be." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was sacred. A breath held between two lives. Then Rosa stood, her curls bouncing, and walked to Jeremias. "Can I still call her Tia?" she asked, pointing at Rosaura. Jeremias knelt. "You can call her whatever you want, but you'll both be ours. Fully." Miguel stood next, nodding once before sitting back down. Then João, without words, hugged Rosaura around the waist and didn't let go. Tears slipped down her cheek before she could stop them. Afterward, when the children had gone to bed and the wind stirred through the open windows, Rosaura sat by the fire with Jeremias at her side. "They chose us," he said. "No," she replied, voice rough with feeling. "We chose each other." He took her hand. Outside, the ranch stretched wide into the dark, the land waiting, watching, holding them. Inside, the weight of the Machados and the court and the years of silence began to loosen its grip. She wasn't a widow anymore. Not in spirit. She was a woman who had lost much and somehow gained more. She was a mother now. Maybe not by blood, but by every other measure that mattered. There are some victories you don't cheer for. You just survive them. Rosaura stood outside the courthouse, the wind lifting strands of her hair as the sun hammered down on her shoulders. Her hands were cold, despite the heat, fingers trembling slightly as she gripped the slip of paper the judge had handed her not 15 minutes earlier. It was a single page, but it held everything. The case had been dismissed. No redistribution, no division of land. The judge had cited overwhelming community testimony, sustained ownership, and demonstrated contribution to the estate's welfare as reasons to uphold her claim. The Machado cousins had left through the back door before the ruling was even read aloud. There were no cheers, no applause. Just the scrape of chairs and the quiet shuffle of people standing like they were walking out of a long, hard funeral. Jeremias joined her on the steps. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His hand found hers and held tight. Her knuckles were white around the paper. She exhaled long and steady. "It's done," she said. "No," he said. "It's ours." They walked to the horses in silence. The town didn't buzz or murmur like it had before. The fight was over, and without it, people seemed unsure what to do with themselves. The Machados had promised to stir things up, to make Rosaura pay, to bring shame or chaos or some final reckoning. But now that they'd lost, they scattered like seeds in dry soil. Back at the ranch, the children were waiting at the gate. They'd been told to stay busy, but Rosaura knew better. Kids could smell trouble just like cattle could smell fire. Miguel saw the folded paper in her hand and straightened. Lucia, who stood half a step behind him, searched her face. Rosaura climbed down and held the paper out. "It's ours," she said again, her voice steadier this time. João was the first to move, rushing toward her, wrapping his arms around her waist in a way he hadn't done since the rain had come. Anna followed her hands, covering her mouth in disbelief. Even little Marta squealed, though she didn't understand what it meant, only that the air was full of relief. The children ran inside to tell the others. Jeremias stayed at Rosaura's side. "You're shaking," he said quietly. "I think I forgot how to stop being ready to lose." He reached for her hand, curling his fingers around hers. "Then let's help each other remember." Inside the house was a storm of noise, clattering feet, laughter, someone crying without knowing why. Lucia hugged her so hard, Rosaura nearly lost her breath. Rosa stood on a chair and declared they were going to make guava cake. Miguel insisted on sharpening all the tools, in case the Machados changed their minds. João danced in a circle with Marta until both fell to the floor in a heap of giggles. Rosaura stood at the center of it all and finally let herself cry. Not from sorrow, not from fear, from release. She hadn't known how heavy the waiting had been until it lifted. Later that evening, after the sun had dipped low and the air turned soft with night, the family gathered outside around a fire pit. It was Lucia's idea. She said they should burn the extra copies of the petition, the legal warnings, the papers that said Rosaura didn't belong. So they did. Each child threw a page into the flames. The paper curled and blackened, rising into the dark like smoke signals from a past that no longer mattered. When it came time for Rosaura to toss in the judge's ruling, she hesitated. Jeremias noticed. "Keep that one." "Why? Because one day they'll ask you how you did it, and you'll want proof." She folded it and slipped it back into her pocket. As the fire burned low, Rosaura looked around at them. Children draped in blankets, cheeks, glowing eyes full of something she hadn't seen before, certainty. "We should plant something," she said suddenly. Lucia turned. "Tonight, no. Tomorrow. Something that stays. Something they'll see grow year after year." Jeremias smiled. "Like what? Lemon trees? Guava? Something stubborn?" Miguel nodded. "Like us." She ruffled his hair, her heart aching with the love that came so freely now. That night, Rosaura and Jeremias sat on the porch, shoulders brushing, watching the fire go out. The coals pulsed like distant stars. "There's something I want to ask," he said after a long silence. She turned to him, the flicker of firelight catching the lines at the corners of his eyes. "Will you marry me?" Her breath caught. "We already built the house, raised the children, buried the enemies," he continued. "All we're missing is the rest of our lives." She didn't speak right away. She looked at the night sky, at the stars that had watched over her through widowhood and grief and fighting and growth. Then she looked back at him. "I don't want another wedding," she said. He blinked. "I want a promise under that jacaranda tree, barefoot and with flour on our hands." He grinned. "You'll still get a ring." "You better," she said. And just like that, the last piece of her past crumbled into dust. She wasn't who she had been. She wasn't someone's wife. She wasn't the land's grieving widow. She wasn't fighting to belong anymore. She belonged in this house, with these children, with this man. She stood, reached out her hand, and pulled him up beside her. "Come on," she whispered. "Let's go to bed." And in the quiet, they went inside, not to escape the world, but to begin living in it fully, as equals, as partners, as family. There are no perfect endings, only roots deep enough to hold through storms. The morning after the promise, Rosora woke to the scent of cornbread and the sound of laughter through the walls. The kind of laughter that came from children who had slept through the night without fear, who knew the roof above them would hold and the ground beneath them wouldn't be taken. She sat up slowly, still tangled in the sheet, and glanced toward the window. Sunlight poured through the lace curtain dust motes, dancing in the gold. Somewhere outside, a chicken clucked indignantly, followed by Joao's voice calling for Miguel. She ran her fingers along the edge of the nightstand, where a small ring box now rested. Inside, the silver band still shimmered, plain but full of quiet promise. It hadn't been slipped on her finger yet. They were saving that for later under the jacaranda tree, just as she'd asked. Jeremias was already gone from bed. No surprise there. He was probably in the fields or fixing the gate that creaked since last week's windstorm. Always moving, always repairing. Just like her. She dressed quickly and stepped out into the main room to find the children gathered around the table, faces bright with excitement. "We made breakfast," Anna announced, standing proudly beside Lucia, who pretended to look stern but had a grin creeping in. Cornbread, eggs, and guava jam filled the table. Even Marta had managed to pour a cup of goat milk without spilling. Rosora looked around at all of them. Did anyone remember salt? They froze. "I did," Rosa shouted, lifting the tiny tin triumphantly. Rosora let out a laugh that came from deep in her chest, the kind that had been missing for too many years. After breakfast, they all moved outside to begin the planting. Miguel and Joao carried saplings, 3 lemon trees and 2 guava. Rosora had chosen their spots herself, one near the well, one beside the back fence, the others where the land sloped gently toward the east. The children dug and poured water. Jeremias knelt in the dirt, sleeves rolled, guiding each tree into place with care. Rosara stood barefoot on the porch steps, skirts hitched, watching it all unfold. "These'll be here long after we're gone," she said. Jeremias looked up. "That's the idea." She joined them in the dirt, kneeling beside Marta, to help press the soil in firm around the roots. "What's this one's name?" Marta asked, pointing to a lemon tree. Rosara tilted her head. "This one's called Luisa." "Why?" "Because she's strong, and she doesn't like to be moved, but if you treat her right, she gives you something sweet." Marta nodded solemnly. "I like Luisa." By late afternoon, the trees stood in rows like young sentinels, their leaves trembling in the breeze. Everyone washed up before supper. The table was quieter now, full of the kind of tired that only comes from doing something real, something that mattered. Rosara watched her children eat with dusty elbows and pink cheeks and thought, this is what peace looks like. Not silence, but fullness. As dusk fell, Jeremias lit the lanterns while Lucia brought out a small cake, nothing grand, just cornmeal and honey with a sprig of mint. Rosora didn't know where the mint came from, but she didn't ask. They ate it under the jacaranda tree with Marta curled in Rosora's lap and Joao leaning against Jeremias's side. Rosa sat beside Anna, both of them humming a lullaby. The air held a softness that didn't ask anything of them. When the stars came out, Rosora stood and turned to face Jeremias. He rose to meet her. There were no guests, no music, just the quiet hum of night and the wide open land around them. "Do you still want it?" she asked. "With everything I am," he answered. He took her hand, sliding the ring onto her finger without ceremony. She didn't need it. She had already promised herself. But still, it felt right. The children clapped, and Lucia wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron. Rosora looked up at the tree, its branches swaying gently. She remembered the first time she'd come home and found strangers in her yard. How she'd burned with fury and grief, fists clenched ready to tear it all down. And how slowly, piece by piece, those strangers had turned into something else. They had turned into hers, and she had become theirs. Later that night, as the house quieted and the fire burned low, Rosora stood at the back window looking out over the moonlit pasture. The saplings were shadows, now small and swaying. She pressed her hand to the glass. There would be other battles. Drought. Illness. Life would not stop testing them. But the war over who she was, that was over. She was Rosora de Lages no longer. She was Rosaura Barreto, wife of a man who had asked for nothing and given everything. Mother to 9 children who hadn't come from her womb, but from something just as sacred choice. And this land, every stone, every beam, every tree was home. Behind her, footsteps padded softly across the wooden floor. "You should sleep," Jeremias said. In a minute, she replied. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. They stood like that in the quiet, listening to the house breathe. "You thinking about tomorrow?" he asked. "No. For once, I'm not." She turned in his arms and laid her head against his chest. Outside, the roots took hold beneath the soil. The wind passed through the leaves like a whisper of blessing. And in the stillness of that moment, nothing was missing, not a single thing.